We have a very distinguished panel here. We've got Kathy Manley, our legal director, and Coleen Rowley, who is Rowley?
Coleen Rowley.
Oh, sorry, Coleen Rowley. Who I guess I'd better introduce herself, but she's there in the material that we have.
I was a career FBI agent for 24 years, the last 13, 14 here in Minneapolis, where I became the legal counsel for the office, trying to train the FBI agents in know your rights, constitutional law and ethics. And then after 9/11, I became a whistleblower because they weren't telling the truth about, they could have prevented 9/11. So I ended up on the cover of Time magazine in 2002 for having told the truth about 9/11. And I testified in judiciary committees and intelligence committees, etc. in Washington. Then I retired in 2004. I became an anti-war activist. And right now I'm trying to get the Minnesotans to sue our congresspersons and senators for having funded Israel's genocide. We're going to try to file a federal complaint in federal court on Monday.
So we're definitely going to want to hear more about that. I'm just going to start off with a little background about Know Your Rights. We all have focused in the past on what happens individually when you come face to face with an FBI agent and the way you have to handle yourself. But I wanted to this time put it into a wider context because there's a historic background to all of this. If you start to look at how the United States is structured from its beginning, there are two poles here. On the one side, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all people are created equal. And on the other side is the Constitution that says that black folks are 3/5 of white folks. And there is this othering in the Constitution that says we're going to treat certain other people as differently as second-class citizens. And that perception keeps recurring about every 20 to 30 years. And they have events we call othering events, and they often follow moments of public hysteria over some event, something happening. And I wanted to just quickly go through there because one of the things that the myth that is out there is that what Trump is doing now is unprecedented. This is new stuff that has never happened before. Actually, this has all happened before. What Trump is basically doing is recycling racism, recycling otherisms. And we've had periods of this in the past in which we've gone through this all. So I just wanted to start quickly back in 1919, after the First World War. There was something called the Palmer Raids. Now what happened was that there was a hysteria about communism. The communists were coming in, they were going to drop bombs on things, they were going to blow up things, they were going to take over the government. And the Attorney General Palmer of the United States decided that to calm the public hysteria, we needed to take action. So he simply went out and grabbed as many leftist communists as he could find and stuck them on a ship and sent them to Russia. There was no due process. Some of them were even citizens, but he just sent them out of the country. Does this sound familiar? Very familiar. This is just what Trump has been doing, where he will just load a bunch of Venezuelans on a plane and send them back to Venezuela. It's exactly the Palmer Raid, only with a name change and a different focus and a different hysteria. But we've seen this before. After that came the detention of the Japanese during World War II. And that was based on the Alien Enemies Act, in which you could detain alien enemies during a period of war. Now, at that time, we actually were at war. So it was technically legal and the Supreme Court allowed it to happen. Now, of course, Trump is doing exactly the same thing. He's saying that Venezuela is trying to invade us, and therefore he can use the Alien Enemies Act to round up aliens and send them off to Venezuela. Or El Salvador, yeah, sorry. More to the point. How did the detention of the Japanese turn out? Well, in, let's say, 1988, the government apologized to the Japanese and provided compensation. We know that was wrong. We know what we did was wrong. And now we're turning around some 20 years later, 40 years later, and redoing it all over again, only with a different group. In 1954, there was a large number of Mexican laborers in the United States because they had come here during World War II because so many Americans were overseas fighting and we needed more laborers. They came here, they were working in the fields, and the decision was made that they needed to go home because we had American troops coming back and they needed jobs. So they simply used the American army to round up about 1 million Mexicans and just throw them over the border to get them out so our guys could take their jobs. It was called Operation Wetback. What a brilliant racist name for a racist policy. Once again, this raised a lot of problems. Everybody got mad about it, and they never did it again. But it sounds exactly like Trump's effort to use the U.S. Army to round up a bunch of people primarily from Mexico and send them back over to back home. And in fact, he referenced Operation Wetback as a sort of a model for this. Then we had the Red Scare after World War II, 50s, 54, again involving communists. And once again, it's very similar to the hysteria that surrounded Muslims after 9/11. Once again, the public turned against McCarthy during his red baiting and his communist hysteria that he raised against them. And he was censured by Congress in 54, so that was only a few years after he started his campaign. The Americans were fed up with it, they didn't want it, and they fought back against it. In 1971, we had a war on drugs, if you remember. Oh, no, sorry, it was 56, it was COINTELPRO. How many people here know COINTELPRO? Does this sound familiar to you? Well, this was this is J. Edgar Hoover becoming afraid that there was going to be a revolution in the country, that the radical groups, the Black Power groups, Black Panthers, national liberation groups, war protesters, were somehow going to take over. And he instituted this program, COINTELPRO, to disrupt and take down, and even in some cases assassinate, black leaders. Once again, in 1974, Congress, in the Church Commission Committee, held that COINTELPRO was an unconstitutional violation of civil freedoms. And the program was ended, back in 71, when it was disclosed by a group of private citizens went out and actually raided an FBI office and got all their files. And that's how they found out about the COINTELPRO program. But within a month of that ending, without a month, they started the war on drugs. And the war on drugs was just an excuse to go after black folks and lock them up, and we ended up with a mass incarceration. And then we had the war on terror, and of course, you know, from the war on terror, is again a continuation of COINTELPRO under a different name in which they've gone after and tried to lock up large numbers of Muslims, and we call that preemptive prosecutions. So the only point I'm going through this is to say there have been all of these things that we've seen today, we have had before. This is a repeat of all of these various programs in the past that were racist. And the reason that they were ended was because people stood up and objected to it. They don't stop by themselves. They stop because people have said, we object to this. And that is part of the problem and why we are here. You know your rights. You have certain rights, and among them is the right to remain silent, not to say things that will incriminate you or get you in trouble. But if you do that, at the same time, you are going to have the problem of you are not standing up to object to the kinds of things that are un-American, that should never occur, that are illegal. And if you don't object, they may very well stay in place. So you see the duality here? You can personally remain safer by not saying anything. But collectively, we cannot stay safe if we stay silent. And that's a point I want to just emphasize to you. And I'm just going to add a couple of other quick things. I guess I'll make one other point. So in assessing who is it that is able to raise these issues, who is it that is going to stand up to the government and say, I object, I don't agree with this. And there's a scale, a kind of a risk scale. At the top of the scale are old white lawyers. I don't know any myself, but old white lawyers who have the least chance of getting done in by the government. And therefore, they have the greatest responsibility to speak out. And whenever you see old white lawyers or any other group of white folks, just remind them that they have, by virtue of their privilege, the largest responsibility to speak out. At the other end of the scale, there are a group of undocumented aliens, and they are at the most risk under this president to speak out. And they have to be very careful about it. But that doesn't mean that they don't have an obligation to speak out. How would that happen? Well, we think about, for example, speaking out to the public as a whole. But one of the most powerful things you can do is simply talk to your neighbors. Talk to your friends. Because if your friends see one person speaking out just in their own group, they will start to feel more confident in talking. I was just up in Maine to visit my daughter, and right across from her house is a house with a big Trump sign on it. And every time you go by, you have to look at this thing. And she finally got so annoyed. She got a great big bed sheet, and she painted the last verse of a poem about resistance and hung it from her second-story window, so it covers the whole side of the house. Now, she didn't want to start a war in the neighborhood. So she has this poem on the side of her house about resistance. It's a kind of an obscure poem. You read it, you go, what? But I think it's enough that the neighbors will look and say, somebody else is hanging up a sign that is saying something. And that means we can talk to that person. And that means that we can hang up a sign saying, I agree with this person. And it means that we can slowly form a community that will start to push back against a MAGA voice that's in the neighborhood. And those are all things you can do, even if you are at risk. You can do those sort of things to push back, because that is also our obligation, to stay safe, but to push back. So, having said that much, Kathy? You wanted to.
So let me footnote some of the history that Steve has just gone through. It's not just every 20, 30 years that we get exactly right, othering, where we scapegoat a group of people for whatever problem is existing at the time. And you see this happening exactly, and you did a great tracing. But these are always during times of war. If you go all the way back to Roman times, this famous Cicero, one of the Roman officials at the time, we're talking thousands of years ago, he said, in times of war, the law falls silent. And that is exactly what happened during these times. You know, during World War II, these weren't green card people, these were Japanese, were American citizens. The one guy that went all the way up to the Supreme Court saying this is unconstitutional and wrong to put all Japanese Americans in concentration camps in California. He actually tried to join the military, the American military, to fight against the Japanese. And his whole family was incarcerated in internment camps in California. Later on, years later, I don't know, 40, 50 years later, the Supreme Court Judge Roberts said that was wrong, that was unlawful, that was unconstitutional. It's really sad that we have to live through these times where everyone gets war fever. And I will take some credit. Maybe the best thing that the smartest thing that I ever did in watching this all unfold is when I wrote the memo that landed me on Time magazine, I put war on terror in quotes. And I wrote, well, we're starting this war on terror. I wrote this in 2002, and the reason was I didn't know what really would happen. I didn't know the FBI would go into entrapments the way this was early on. Nothing had come down from on high saying, okay, go out. And I knew one thing. Robert Mueller, the FBI director, had allowed 1,000, mostly immigrants in New York City, to be rounded up right off the bat. That happened right away. About 1,000, none of them were terrorists, none. And some of them were held in jail for a year, and some were beat up. And the jailers, the FBI, told them they were terrorists. There were 1,000 of them. I knew that had happened. But I didn't know it would go so crazy. But I knew enough to at least put the thing in my head, and I put war on terror. I think I might have been the first person to put war on terror in quotes in 2002. And that war on terror, I'm going to annotate just a little more from World War II. COINTELPRO was the FBI program, but the CIA had CHAOS, that was their program. These were all the same. CHAOS program, and the NSA, the spying, had Minaret. Later on, we found out we don't know who all the targets were. To this day, these go back to the 60s. We don't even know who was targeted in all of these things. Because only the COINTELPRO came out because there was a whistleblower. There was a whistleblower, Sullivan, and he was working under Hoover. He told the church committee the truth about the COINTELPRO. But nobody in the CIA or the NSA told anyone. So those remain fairly secret to this day. But one thing came out, and the one thing that came out with the NSA, that they were targeting 7 leaders. One of them was Muhammad Ali. No surprise, because he was against the Vietnam War. One was an editor of the New York Times. I think also an editor of the Washington Post. One was Art Buchwald. Does anyone remember who Art Buchwald was? You have to have the gray hair like me. Art Buchwald was a humorist writing columns in the New York Times, and he was targeted by the NSA. Talk about your othering. Now, this is the really concerning thing of these 7, and this is all known now because some document came out. One of the 7 was Senator Church. Frank Church himself, one of our senators. And this is why you don't go crazy with the war fever, because it all blows back on yourself. That's why you tell people, oh, this isn't about scapegoating other people. This comes back to you. Frank Church, who was one of our main senators, was the target of the NSA during the Vietnam War. So I just wanted to add some of those tidbits about the problems that occur. And when you say the law doesn't matter, torture, for instance, we legalize torture on the other, on people that we held in black sites. Guess what? That's all blown back on, we see the mass shootings, we see all this violence erupting in the United States. That's because we've basically said, oh well, we can do it. the rest of the world. The rest of the world, we gave a green light to torture things all over the world now, including Americans now who get caught up in something can be tortured. So it was very stupid, very, very stupid to let this war fever get carried away. All right, so let's see what else I wanted to say here. I want one more thing. The war on terror turned into the good people in government who saw this was wrong. And a lot of them are my friends now. There was a CIA agent who actually started talking about torture, the torture programs. John Kiriakou. John Kiriakou became a whistleblower on the CIA's torture. Guess what? They put him in prison for 4 years. He had to plead guilty to a lesser charge because he could have gone for longer than that. Tom Drake in the NSA, he was prosecuted. Julian Assange. Julian Assange, I met him 4 times in the Ecuador embassy. He's actually one of my friends too. They started to say freedom of speech and freedom of press. And now it's continuing on, even dissent against genocide right now. They're trying to make that illegal in the United States, even to dissent against genocide. It came real close to not passing in the committee. A couple of days ago, they wanted to make the definition of anti-Semitism to say any criticism of Israel, even of Israel's genocide, is a crime. And thanks to Rand Paul departed from the rest of the Republicans, and otherwise it would have passed out of committee. So when Julian Assange was put in prison for how many years? Oh my gosh, he was in prison for a long time, and they were trying to extradite him to the United States. That comes back to exactly World War I. In World War I, the president did not want to have any dissent of Americans going into World War I. Why? Because he had promised the people who elected him that the United States would stay out of World War I. His whole base was against going this. So what did he do? He passed the Espionage Act in 1917. And then, after we went into World War I, he could put the union leaders, he could actually even put people who were handing out Bible verses, he put in prison, who were saying, oh, we want to be peacemakers. And this again, during a really bad time of World War I. So all of this came back, and now they use that law, it never got taken off the books, to go against journalists and freedom of the press. So that's the history, and it's really awful. The root problem is letting war fever get the country carried away. And I have more pragmatic tips on know your rights from the FBI side, because I gave training about all of these things for 13 years, but I'm going to let that go until after you talk.
All right. Thanks. Oh, and since you mentioned John Kiriakou, he was in prison with our client Yasin Araf, who's the one that got us into all this stuff in Loretto, Pennsylvania, I believe it was. So, and the prison tried to pit them against each other too, and they saw through that. Anyway, let's see. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the stuff that's in my handout, not all of it, but just go through some of it because it's important to know what the law is and what your rights are supposed to be under the Constitution. Even if they're not being followed, you got to realize that they're not always following them now, especially for non-citizens. They're mostly following them for citizens. But if we don't push back, it'll just keep expanding. So, as you know, we've seen recently, since Trump got into office, they've been going hard against immigrants, even green card holders. So the first one was Mahmoud Khalil, who was detained by ICE just because of his free speech activity, nothing to do with terrorism. They try to say this stuff, but it's clearly they have nothing like that against him. And interestingly, like CCF has been doing this work for the past 15 years, and we've seen, you know, people now, a lot of people now, when they see these people being detained, indefinite detention, just based on their First Amendment speech, they're shocked and they're saying, how can this be happening? Well, did you ever hear of Guantanamo? I mean, most of those people were totally innocent, sold for a $5,000 bounty, you know, by Musharraf in Pakistan, you know. These things are not new, even without going back all the time that Steve was talking about and Coleen was talking about. You know, we saw it through the past 20 years, the past 15 years that CCF has been doing this work. People don't even know about the domestic cases. They might have heard of Guantanamo, but they didn't seem to care about it. And because not enough people spoke out about Guantanamo and not enough people spoke out against torture, now here we are today with them continuing these abuses, which they might be doing anyway, but the more you can fight back against it, like with the church committee put a stop to COINTELPRO, and they actually changed the law, and things got better for a while. You know, it always comes back around, something happens, a war happens, and we get repression again, but the more you can push back against it and get some kind of accountability, the less likely it's going to happen later, and it's not going to be as bad. So because we didn't push back against Guantanamo, it's still open. Torture, they said they stopped, but there was no accountability. Not one person got any, they didn't even pay any damages like other countries did for going along with the U.S. Other countries paid damages. The U.S. didn't pay one penny, didn't say they were sorry, did nothing, and Guantanamo's still open. Cheney wrote a book bragging about torture. He got away with it because Obama said, well, we're not going to look back, we're going to look forward. That was a huge mistake. Anyway, so CCF has been aware of this stuff for a long time. So actually, interestingly, when I found out who Mahmoud Khalil's lawyer was, Amy Berman, I found out that he got that lawyer through somebody in CCF. I didn't know that at the time. But I found out that before he got detained, and he was protesting at Columbia, somebody told him, maybe you need a lawyer, because we could see, not me, but that something might be happening, the repression, reprisals against the encampments, that, this might be happening, and so they luckily got him a lawyer first, and it was Josh Stratel's associate. Josh Stratel is the lawyer we've worked with for years, and it was Amy Berman worked for him, and that was the first lawyer he had, and she's the one that in the middle of the night, when he was grabbed, she's sitting at her computer typing up that habeas petition, which got filed in New York. He was actually in New Jersey at that point, so it had to be transferred to New Jersey. But that's why the case isn't in Louisiana, because he had that lawyer already, thanks to somebody from CCF. So CCF might not be too well known, but we kind of get around to it. And so we've seen judges starting to push back against this stuff. We had a couple really good victories recently in Vermont, where first there was Mohsen Madawi, who was a green card holder who was called in for his citizenship interview in Vermont, and he knew what might come down because Mahmoud had already been detained, and he's a green card holder. Unfortunately, still locked up. But so Mohsen was ready with his lawyers and his habeas petition. So then they tricked him into going in. They grabbed him. They tried to ship him to Louisiana, but that habeas got filed really quick. And I forget where he might have gone. He might have stayed. I can't remember all the details of these. But basically, he was released. He was the first one released a couple of weeks ago from the judge in Vermont. And I just burst into tears when that happened because there's been all these court cases. I've been trying to follow them, but that was the first one that got released. And I was so happy that, we actually saw this good result. And then, as was mentioned earlier, Rumeysa Öztürk was released just yesterday, and that was another wonderful one. And, these cases are still going on. It's going to be a battle up to the Supreme Court, and so it's important to pay attention to that and what happens with that, because that's going to affect other people's rights going forward. But anyway, just to get back to the rights, so we have a lot of constitutional rights that we're supposed to have, and it's good to know about them and fight for them. And, you know, of course, the First Amendment right is for free speech, freedom of assembly, so protest, freedom of religion, freedom to express your religion. All those things fall under the First Amendment. That's super important. And the Supreme Court's actually been pretty good on First Amendment rights compared to some other things. So we'll see what happens with these cases coming up with the immigrants that are being detained only because of their First Amendment speech. And then the next one is the Fourth Amendment right to not lose your life, liberty, or property without what? Due process, right? And due process means the right to know what evidence is coming against you and the right to confront it. Also in the Sixth Amendment, but that you have a right to be heard and to basically challenge what's going on. And so they're fighting for those rights right now with these cases to be able to raise these the First Amendment issues. But you can't do it in immigration court. You have to do it in regular federal court. And then, Fourth Amendment Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment is that you can't be arrested without due process or have your property taken without due process. And the Fifth Amendment is more about due process, that you have a right to due process. And also, does anybody else know what else is in the Fifth Amendment? Not you. Yes. The right to remain silent. So that's really important when you're dealing with law enforcement, of course. If they come to your home, don't even open the door at this point. We used to say you can open the door, but don't let them in. But ICE has been just pushing their way in once that door starts to open. So don't even open the door if you can possibly avoid it. Like if you have some idea who they might be, if you can see it. Ask if they have a warrant signed by a judge, not just what ICE calls a warrant, which isn't a real warrant. It has to be signed by a judge, and if they have that, well, you might as well let them in, because like the song says, they're going to come in, and they're going to do what they're going to do that their warrant allows them to do. But if they don't have a warrant, they still might come in, but at least don't let them in. And you can ask them to slide their card under the door and tell them that your attorney will contact them. And that's all you say to them. There might be a few exceptions to that we might get into, but basically that's all you say to them is, I'll have my attorney contact you. Even if you don't have an attorney, then call me or call somebody.
Wait a minute, just let's emphasize it. What do you say? What are the 11 magic words? Give me your card, I will have my attorney contact you. When you're there and you're faced with an FBI agent glaring at you, your mind goes blank, right? So you got to memorize this. What do you say?
Give me your card.
Thank you, Steve. And if you're out on the street and you get stopped by law enforcement, you should ask, am I being detained? Because if you're not being detained, and they have to theoretically have a reason to detain you, not just because they feel like it. So if you're not being detained, just walk away. Unless you want to film them doing something with somebody else, which I'll get to in a minute. But basically, ask if you're being detained. If not, walk away. And if you are being detained, you still don't answer their questions. You don't even have to tell them who you are, except in certain states. So, no, if you're in one of those states, but New York is not, I don't even know about Minnesota. Anyway, so if you see something happening with somebody else, police trying to search or stop somebody or ICE, you can pull out your phone and record them. I would say be really careful about that if you're not a U.S. citizen, because they'll just use any excuse to, ICE use any excuse to go after people right now if they're not a U.S. citizen. They're using that as like the excuse, and we've seen it happen historically before too. But if you're a citizen, you're well within your rights to record them, and it's a good idea. If you can do it without interfering with them, you can be a little bit out of the way. And, if they're going after, say, an immigrant, you might want to try to not record that person, the target, if you can avoid it, so that doesn't get out there in case, whatever, that could be a problem. But you want to show what the ICE or the police are doing. That can be super important. If you're a non-citizen and you're out somewhere, you are technically supposed to show your immigration papers upon request, so it's good to keep them with you, and you kind of do have to do that if they ask for that. And then just, if you're traveling abroad, it is risky for non-citizens right now, and I have a bunch of stuff in my handout about that. If you're a U.S. citizen and you're coming back into the U.S., they have to let you in, and you don't really have to answer questions except like your identity and where you're coming from. They will ask to look at your phone or your computer, and so I would advise people, if you can, don't even bring your actual phone with you. Bring a burner phone for the trip. Sometimes you can't do that, so if you can't, like a little cheap track phone or something, if you can't do that, then at least don't use facial recognition to unlock the phone. Make sure it's locked with a secure password. And they cannot legally make you give them the password. That violates your right to remain silent. And so, but if it's facial recognition, they can kind of make it happen sometimes, so don't do that. And they can take your devices. They don't always do it. There was that case of a lawyer who represents somebody involved in Palestine protests, and he was detained they can hold you for a little bit of time, maybe an hour or so, maybe longer, but they can't really keep you out of the U.S. if you're a U.S. citizen. Sometimes people do get delayed for a while. And they didn't even take his phone. They were asking to look at it. I think he finally showed them contacts or something, but then he didn't actually let them have it. And they didn't take it. They can take the phone. Maybe it was something you worked out with them. But anyway, they can take the devices, and they can hold them for 30 days, sometimes more. So just be aware that they can do that at the border. If you're a non-citizen and you feel like you have to travel abroad, and then it's important to consult with an immigration attorney, and also to have someone who's able to check in with you, that you can check in with, to let them know where you are in the process, how you're doing, if anything goes wrong, and also for them to have access to copies of your immigration documents, because you might need them. Maybe somebody will take the ones you have with you, who knows. So it's good to have copies somewhere else too. So there's a lot more in the handout too, but I'll just mention briefly the material support law at the end, because that's important to know when you're writing things or speaking out, and you want to talk about resistance. There's a law called Material Support to Terrorism. It's usually about giving any kind of support to a group that's on a list that the U.S. government made of designated foreign terrorist organizations, and there's actually a link to that list, the most recent version of it, on the handout, because they just added a bunch of Venezuelan gangs to it, whatever. It's like a ridiculous list, but you have to know that if you give any support to any group on that list, and support doesn't have to be anything violent. It can be just writing an op-ed talking about, say if it was Hamas, the grievances of Palestinians, which they're being subjected to genocide, so, you don't even have to talk about violence. But there is another part to it that's required, which is called coordination. Technically, you're supposed to be coordinating with the group in question, but as we've seen in some of the cases, that doesn't always apply. So the Holy Land case, they weren't even supporting Hamas. they were giving money to Sakat committees in Gaza, not Hamas, and they still got convicted and sentenced to 65 years, so that's totally outrageous. But the way the law is supposed to be is it's supposed to require coordination with a designated group. In the Tariq Mahana case, he's out now, he served a 17-year sentence, I think, for putting information on the internet, supporting a group, and then but not being directly in contact with the group that they could prove. And then the government's theory was, well, the group could download this information from the internet, so that's coordination. It wasn't like sending it directly. It was just putting it on a website, so be careful of that too. So just like, if you're not a citizen, be really careful about what you post, or, because they're just violating free speech rights of non-citizens right now. But if you're a citizen, you can say, I support Palestinian resistance. People under occupation have a right to armed resistance. But if you start talking about Hamas or any other group directly, publicly, that could be a problem. So just be aware of that. But as Steve said, it's really important right now for especially citizens, and especially people who aren't targeted because of their race. Like you said, there's that gradation of risk, but it's really important for us to speak up and push back, because silence will not protect us, even individually, really. We really need to speak up about this right now and do everything we can to prevent it from getting worse, and so that our constitutional rights don't do us any good if they're not enforced, so we have to fight for them.
Okay, I'm just going to add a couple things. One of the more dangerous situations is when the police are sometimes breaking down your door. So there used to be this notion, it's been, the judges have said you can't break down doors unless it is in the warrant. The judge has to sign off and say, they call it a no-knock warrant. And they used to put a little flashbang grenade right at the door, so the door would kind of blow up. Now, this was common practice in Minnesota when I was still working. And then the judges started to say, no, that's dangerous. That's very dangerous. The law, if we still care about the law, says you're supposed to knock and announce. So that gives it time. So when they say, FBI, we have a warrant for your arrest. FBI, we have a search warrant. That's what they're supposed to say at the doorway. And that gives you the time then to say that you, hold on. If you have a warrant, I'll open the door. The thing is, if they have a warrant, there's no point in keeping the door shut, as you just said.
But I used to say they have a warrant, but it's not a real warrant.
Yeah, okay, so listen to what they say. There's knock and announces, they're supposed to identify themselves. Okay, now, what we found out for a long time was the Drug Enforcement Administration, they aren't as well known as the FBI. People didn't know there was another agency called DEA. So instead of saying, when they were at the doorway, instead of saying, DEA, we have a warrant for searching for drugs, they would say FBI, or they say federal agents, and try to confuse. Well, one thing is, people didn't know DEA, so they were just being a little practical and saying they were misidentifying themselves. But the law is they're supposed to knock and announce, and then they're supposed to wait. Now, how long do they have to wait at the door before they break it down if you don't open it? Well, one case said 30 seconds, which isn't very long. So somebody was, or a minute, but I think 30 seconds. It's not a very long time. Now, what?
They'll be at the back too.
Yeah, they're waiting. Yeah, they can be. If it's an arrest warrant, actually, one of the first arrests I had, they went out a window in the back. So yes, if it's an arrest warrant, the fugitive goes out the back. So yeah, they're going to probably be standing outside the back as well. If it's an arrest, not a search warrant.
Search warrants, they do sometimes do that.
Yeah, they're being especially careful. Where the danger comes in is when somebody's going, you saw all these national cases where some law enforcement is going through the front door. There was a black woman in Tennessee, I think, where was it? Someplace recently, and she gets shot. Yeah, so.
They went to the wrong, or no.
It,
They went to the wrong house. Well, they went to
no,
the right
that was the
house.
right house. No, it was her boyfriend, and but it wasn't her. Sandra, yeah, that's right.
That was the political. There's too many of these cases.
That's exactly right. There's a lot of cases, so it's like you forget the names because there's a lot. I want to just talk about this danger and what maybe can help minimize it a little bit. Veronica, yeah. And she was a probation officer. EMS, yeah. So these bad shootings actually are why they created knock and announce. That's the reason they made the law to begin with. Because there's too many people come to the door. One thing, the police are scared, the feds or police, they're all scared. They have their hands on their guns. And so furtive movements. We've had some shootings in cars here and just complete mistaken shootings, complete mistaken. But if an officer thinks that your hand is going, like in a car, you have a gun in the glove compartment or under the seat. And so if they see any quick furtive movement of and they can't see your hands. So that one thing to eliminate, now this could even be a traffic stop. Philando Castile, just a plain traffic stop. And the thing is, they have to see your hands. So one thing is, you're going to show them ID. You're trying to get your driver's license to show them who you are. You can't do it quickly. You got to say, show them your hands. My driver's license is in the glove compartment. Can I get my driver's license to show you? Okay, that's where talking. There are some exceptions about talking with the police for safety purposes. And again, if you're just trying to say, I won't talk to the police, you have to be careful. There are exceptions to it. And one is to talk to them. Another one is if, for instance, they're coming into your house or your, where you're living to search it, and even with a warrant or for an arrest, and you don't want to talk to them about who your friends are, you don't want to talk about any of that stuff. Hold on the mic for a second. All right. 2 weeks ago, I fell off my bicycle. You see this big long incision here in my arm? Okay, and I had surgery. And if you have had any health issue or surgery like this, please tell the police, because they may take your arm back. They'll say they're trying to keep safe, but if you take a medication and your heart is starting to beat harder, that kind of communication with the police, I think, is good. If you have a dog, exactly, or a child somewhere in the house. All those kinds of small talk, and it's not even small talk, but those kinds of things you can talk about. No furtive movement, show your hands. Yes, and everything in the article is don't do what I'm doing, which is yelling. I get excited. Don't get excited. Stay calm, as calm as possible with the police, and all times show them your hands. If you run away from the police and try to get to like behind the couch, or they can use that as an excuse. And again, there's a lot of really wrongful uses of deadly force. And afterwards, the police will say, well, we thought they had something in their hands. We thought we saw the metal. We saw some metal. Usually it's a cell phone or something. And so there's all kinds of things, but that's because of furtive, quick movements. Okay, so that's all I wanted to add.
Every now and then, you need to know that nowadays with Facebook, with social media, with cell phones, with all kinds of ways, we put out into the internet all sorts of information about ourselves. And we pretend that we're talking to our friends. And we can be very candid about what we think about all sorts of matters. And that no one will ever find out what we are saying. We don't even think about it. But basically, we are writing a brief for the government if they ever decided to go after us. And if they can get this material from your phone, from going online, and they have all sorts of electronic ways to do this, they can make a put together by bits and pieces and taking little things out of context, a very interesting profile of what you are like. So I do suggest one of the things to take, be careful about yourself is to every now and then take a look at what you have put out there into the internet, in your cell phone and so on. And imagine how it would be if the government was to read this to a jury. What would it sound like? I think you need to have that sense of self-awareness. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but the privacy is gone. And you need to know what you look like into a government that is not neutral, can be very hostile to you, can be totally focused on building a case against you. I don't want to tell you to not communicate, to not say things, to not join your friends, to not hold hands, to not chant, to not do a whole lot of things that I want you to do. But just do it in a sensible, controlled way, particularly in view of your risk situation. I guess that's the one thing I wanted to add. And the other thing is, there are times when you're going to be called upon to protest something that is going on. There will be protests. There is Gaza. How can there not be protests, right? How can we not protest Gaza? But what can we say about it? What can we say about people who are being deported? And one of the things I think is important to do is to come up with protests or phrases or approaches to what we say that if you can imagine it later appearing in the newspaper, people will say, I agree with that, rather than, wow, those guys are awful. They are violent, destructive, crazy people. Do you see what I'm saying? That very often what you say and what is going to be recorded inevitably and will become part of the debate. It will get into on the internet. So, for example, if you see your friend being arrested by the FBI and they're going to be deported, what would you say? And one phrase might be, no deportations before due process. No deportations before due process. The one nice thing about that phrase is that it's absolutely true. It is not, you don't know anything about the situation of your friend. You don't know what he has done or what he hasn't done, what the record is going to disclose at trial. But you can say, give him due process. And that's true for everybody. Nobody should have a problem with that. So try to find phrases that will not necessarily put you too far out in front, that will have the government aimed at you, at the same time allow you to speak out and speak out forcefully and allow other people to join you. So.
And I just thought of one more little tiny thing to mention. The right to silence. If you say, I don't want to talk to you, you have invoked your Fifth Amendment right to silence. But they can come back a couple hours later and ask you again, have you changed your mind? Will you talk with us now? So if this is a real interrogation and not one of these quick things where it's just informal, but if it's a real interrogation, you say, I don't want to talk to the police, that only lasts for a couple hours. 5 hours? Oh, okay. But, as Steve mentioned, if you say, my right to attorney,
That's what I was going to say.
yeah. That's why mentioning my attorney, my right to attorney, that lasts forever. And there is one exception to that, and I don't want to go into it, but it's called the public safety exception. So when we had a terrorist suspect in custody in Minnesota at the time of 9/11, and he possibly knew of other planes that were going to fly into buildings, I argued with our U.S. attorney that we did not have to follow that invocation of right of attorney. And the reason is, when there is, in the other case it can happen is a kidnapping. If someone gets buried into a lie and we found the kidnapper, then actually the Miranda rights no longer apply, because now you're trying to save the life of the kidnapped victim who is under, someone. There's a case like this, by the way.
These cases are very rare. So.
It does. It happened once. I know here, it doesn't happen, but it happened in the Minnesota case. And actually, even because people didn't know the law, I want to mention the police and even the U.S. attorneys don't know these things. They don't know the law any better than the public. The acting U.S. attorney, the day of 9/11, the day of, and we just wanted to ask, are there more planes going to fly into buildings? And he said, no, you can't do that, Miranda rights. And I said, there's a public safety exception. He had never heard of it. And he was the acting U.S. attorney. So the thing is, that's why I trained the FBI, because the law enforcement, many times, they get away with doing illegal things, but a lot of times they don't even know the right and wrong of stuff. The judges sometimes don't even know.
So at this point, having given you a lot of material, does anybody have any questions? Or comments? Yeah. Yes.
When you were speaking about not having any movements that could be potentially threatening to law enforcement, there was a very famous scenario, infamous scenario that went viral. There was a guy in Las Vegas. He was in a hotel, and the SWAT team came to this hotel, and they put the lien on this person. They was like, "Oh, if you don't comply, I'm going to kill you." This person complied to every law enforcement command, and they still shot him dead.
Is he the one who was crawling in the hallway?
Yes.
Yeah.
I forgot the guy's name, but I forgot whether he was the SWAT leader, but he was definitely the guy who shot him. He turned him into Swiss cheese. He just riddled him. They allowed this guy to retire fully, full rank, full pension, and they gave him free therapy sessions for killing somebody unjustly. It's just insanity. So those things prove that depending on the situation, it doesn't matter how much you comply, in their eyes it's non-compliance.
It is all circumstance and people dependent. And there are good people, there are bad people. There are police officers who want to show off and be bullies all the time. They shoot first. I could be up here all day telling you stories. I could tell you some horrible stories of all kinds of things. Just one that was well known was the shooting in Ruby Ridge. This was when I was still an agent, and the head guy in the office thought he could make up his own law. It was called the deadly force policy. That's constitutional. Nobody can say, well, now we shoot all persons on sight. He made up a rule for those agents and told them they could shoot any male on sight. So that's wrong. And then they lied about it afterwards. It was called Ruby Ridge. This was an anti-government guy, but he had his wife and child. They had already shot his 15-year-old son. Not the FBI, but a marshal had shot the 15-year-old already. And then a marshal had been killed. And when law enforcement gets killed, everybody loses their mind. This guy gave an order saying you could shoot all males on sight. So then an FBI sniper He saw the door open. He thought he was shooting the so-called male. He shot the wife holding her baby. And the state of Ruby Ridge, Oklahoma, no, Utah. So Utah charged that FBI agent with murder. And he got off, but it went on for years and years. And the FBI learned a lesson. They learned the lesson that you can't make up and tell people that no longer does the Fourth Amendment, depriving somebody of their life. You can't do that and say shoot all males on sight. You can't make that up. So those things happen, and it's a lot of times it's just because of anytime a police officer is shot. Oh my gosh! All of these things we're saying, everyone has to be far more careful, because once they say officer down, they all have their guns on.
Yes, whether they see one or not.
Yeah, that's right. It's scary as heck.
I have a question. Has there ever been a member of U.S. law enforcement who's been like properly convicted for first-degree murder of a civilian? Has that ever happened?
It's happened with state police from a state, right? You've seen that happen, but with federal?
But was it first-degree murder that they were convicted of, or like was like something like second degree or manslaughter?
Second degree, but they go away for life sometimes.
Oh, okay.
Just there's no guarantees. Like there's all these horror stories, but you're much more likely to stay alive if you follow this advice of remaining calm, not making these furtive movements, not fighting with them. Much more likely to stay alive. So that's important. I forgot what else I was going to say.
Any other questions?
I'm just going to answer. This is not exactly the answer to the question. I do know of one FBI agent who went to prison for murder. He murdered his female informant, and then he put her body in the trunk and had her body in his FBI car for 3 days until they found out. And he got off lightly. His name was Mark Putnam, and he got off lightly. He had gotten his female informant pregnant, and then he killed her. And you know what? There are lots. I've written articles about this. We watch too much TV. And TV tells everybody there's good guys with white hats and bad guys. Good guys, you see, all of your police shows are like this. Good guys versus bad guys. When I was growing up, we had cowboys versus Indians. The good cowboys were shooting the bad Indians. So it's very similar to what you're saying about the othering. Well, you know what? Reality life is not good guys versus bad guys. I know a lot of bad FBI agents and police officers. Of course, there's a lot of bad people in the world, period. But I do, like this one guy who murdered his informant. One of the reasons why I wrote a letter to the U.S. Attorney to let Leonard Peltier was in prison for 47 years. He was a Native American who was prosecuted for shooting FBI agents. He was in prison for nearly 50 years. He's very sick. And I wrote a letter 2 years ago to say compassionate release. I wrote a letter saying compassionate release at this point. This is just vindictive. And the reason, and I put in Mark Putnam. I put that in the letter. I said, Mark Putnam, who killed someone, he only got 7 years. And here, this Leonard Peltier had 50-some years. So anyways, I just wanted to say there are some FBI agents. My own supervisor in New York City on mafia. I was working on mafia cases in New York City for 7 years. And one of my supervisors was tried for murder. He was a 25-year FBI supervisor. The reason they put him on, he got off, but they put him on state debt. The state tried him for murder. The reason? He was operating a top organized crime Italian mobster who was killing people. And he was the FBI informant, they called it top echelon informant, of my supervisor. When they found out, they actually tried to prosecute my supervisor. Look it up on 60 Minutes. His name was Lynn DeVecchio. So, there's no good guys versus bad guys.
You mentioned the stop and identify as an exception, and maybe you could clarify a little bit people that might run into this. There are 12 states currently that have stop and identify statutes: Alabama, Delaware, Florida, Illinois, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, New Hampshire, New York.
No, New York doesn't have that.
Oh,
Doesn't.
okay.
That's wrong. Is that AI? I don't know the states,
Sorry,
though, but
this
New York
is Wikipedia, so take Wikipedia for it with a grain of salt.
Okay.
All right, and North Dakota, Rhode Island, Utah, and Wisconsin.
Yeah, I didn't know which states it was, but it's definitely not New York.
Okay,
I'll have to check into that more. Yeah.
but so maybe if you run into this, how best to handle that kind of a situation? If you were to tell them, I'm not.
I guess it would be good to know whether it's the law in the state that you're in, and then if you travel to a state, like I don't even know how it is in Minnesota, so it is good to know that just in case, because, you could be arrested for not giving your name if you're in one of those states, which is definitely not New York.
Well, Wisconsin's next door here. Yeah,
Right.
North Dakota, same way.
I didn't know this.
Even if a state does not have that law, stop and identify, it's a main tactic, especially for drug forfeiture, to have a pretextual stop. So my family, when I had two little kids in the back, and we were the victims of a quote unquote pretextual stop. And I figured it out. It's legal. They'll say your headlight is a little dim. If police are following you and you don't stop long enough at a stop sign, all kinds of things. They can say any little traffic violation, they can pull you over. Now, they're not pulling you over because, your headlight is a little dim. That's what they told us. Oh, your headlight is a little dim or something. The reason was my kids, we had put a different car part on the front of our car because we had a car accident, so they put a different color car part, and I let our kids paint on it. So it looked like a hippie car because they had some kids paint on it. So yeah, we got stopped driving from Minnesota to Iowa, and he said our light was a little dim. And I said, oh my gosh, that is a pretextual stop. And you know what? The same things apply with the furtive movements. If you get stopped, what they're really looking for are drugs. And they're trying to look into your car, say they smell marijuana, or no longer marijuana, but
That's on the state,
Yeah.
And sometimes it's driving while black, unfortunately.
Other questions?
But I was talking about the stop and identify is when you might just be walking down the street, not even in a car. But if you're driving a car, you always have to provide your license and registration if you get pulled over.
Can I ask you all?
How safe do you all feel at this point after listening to this discussion? Not at all.
I feel safer in Kenya.
Do you want to just talk a little bit about that? Because I think this is something that we need to deal with a bit. I'm serious. I think part of what we were trying to do here today was to notify you about your rights, but not also scare the daylights out of you. Because what I'm afraid is happening is with the media and with everything else, everybody's getting really scared. And if you're scared, you're going to be quiet. And if you're going to be quiet, we're not going to get any pushback. Right? Anybody want to talk about that? No.
No, actually I was scared before.
Yep.
So now it's more.
Okay. Oh, now it's even worse?
Yeah,
Good.
because
Tell us about it.
I'm not gonna pay much, I told you. So I just, I can't. And a lot of people feel the same way, because like when you have people came to your house and then when people came to your house and, you know, when they push your house and take your son away, then a lot of chaos, and at least 40 men came to our house and were not. From that day till now, I'm so scared. Even right now, I'm scared because of as I was saying, I used to live in Fairfax County. So Fairfax County, Virginia, the police car, they're different than where I live right now. So when I see the Fairfax County police, I see them and I'm scared of them. And, you know, every time I'm driving, I see if they are even standing somewhere. If the car is nobody's, in there, I'm always scared and feel unsafe. And when I'm not around that area, I'm okay. But right now, I'm more.
And what I love, Chandra, about what you said was that you were completely honest about it. You're scared, I'm scared, and we're all scared. And these are times when all sorts of bad things can happen to people. And I love the question that was given to Hatem. How do you deal with the fear? And he said, I'm not afraid at all. Well, all right, God bless him. But some of us aren't that tough. Anybody got some ideas about how you deal with fear? Yeah.
Well, the way I deal with fear is, I wouldn't say, I don't really feel particularly safe, but I don't let fear stop me. And I feel like more vulnerable if I'm not knowledgeable about how to stay safe and how to deal with things and how to answer things. And I think that makes a person more susceptible for something to happen if you're not aware of the knowledge that people, even though, like if you find out about something, it could make you more fearful. Like if you know what I mean? Like it could make you fearful, but I think it makes you feel, I think it's more, it makes you feel, it makes you feel more protected. Knowledge is power. Yes. Yep.
I'm just thinking about the surprise effect and maybe seizing the initiative. So you're stopped for some kind of bad light on your car or something that isn't functioning. And when the officer tells you that, you say, thank you. Thank you so much for stopping me. I'd never forgive myself if I hurt anybody because of this, and I will go right away and have this, corrected. I remember a story about, maybe it was real, I'm not sure anymore where I heard it, but there was an older woman who was driving by herself in the countryside. Her car quit working, and there she was. And so she saw this other car coming toward her. A man whom she did not know got out of the car. She thought quickly, and she said, thank God you are here. You are my angel. I just got a message from above that somebody would come and help me. Well now, I can see that you're a good person. How are you going to respond to that? You're going to say, okay, lady, what do you need? So those are some things to think about. Cleverness never hurts. And always giving that other person the possibility of being okay, wanting to help you. Could happen if it's in their heart. Thank you.
So
Generally, I'm not scared. I feel like 5 feet and not very mighty. I've like just never been that person. I've been the person that, I'm the eldest of 4, and now like since my sister converted 5 siblings, they're all taller than me. I'm the shortest, but I've always been the one to protect every single one of them, including my brothers, who are taller than me now. Just recently, I was invited to Stockton University to give a talk about weaponization of identity, and when you said knowledge is power, I started, generally you're like, and this is speaking from a left perspective, because I don't align with the right fascist political thing right now, and I was trying to make sense of things, and if you look into the Black Panther movement, if you look into Malcolm X, and all their politics sort of align with that kind of politics. So the identity politics part of it, I was like, identity politics is so tainted, it's bad, it was used in the last election against our community. So why is it so bad? And I started reading, there was this book called, I'm going to remember in a second, but it's like Elite Capture. And Elite Capture talks about the weaponization of identity. And then I started doing research, and I started looking into how movements were disrupted, how movements were broken down. And it was fear through different governmental programs. And there was always a solution, but the solution was from the oppressor itself. So, for example, I'll do the Black Power movement, and this is like my jumbled up words. I should go read about it a little bit more and become a little bit better versed at saying this. So when DEI was created, it was actually like corporations and NGOs were starting to form a lot more after these movements were suppressed, because it was like, we can give you something very controlled through us, through our grants, through our programs, that you can operate under. But they're going to be very, very structured in the way we want you to speak, in the way we want you to do it. They're not going to be the Latino movement, the Native American movement. They're not going to be the Black movement. They're not going to be the Muslims that were organizing in the Black community. It's not going to be those movements. It's going to be very structurally through corporate oversight, through NGO oversight, through these programs, and we're going to tell you, we can all have a bulletin board in your office building that's going to tell us, oh my God, Eid is here. Oh my God, we Ramadan, right? But that's it. You cannot actually ask for your rights in its entirety. You cannot identify. You cannot talk about your practice and faith in whatever form you want to, but you can do it like this. We can do it over noodles, we can do it over biryani, we can do it over shawarma, but that's it. That's where it stops. We can do it over our clothing, but that's it. And so it became so popular because people were like, it suits you, right? It suits you to be accepted. And so it took off, and more people through this was part of an extension of COINTELPRO, that people were subdued. People are really placated through these movements. So in this moment, the way I feel that I have sort of tackled my fear, and I felt for the first time actually afraid, and not just afraid for me, I have kids, I have a husband, I have family, that the more that I read about it, the more I find solutions on, like I was saying earlier, how am I going to post on Facebook? I'm not going to stop posting. But I will find out how can I support prisoners. I will find out how I can support activists. I will find out how I can support encampments. And you can. It's just that you have to do it in a very, very strategic way, align yourself with organizations that are doing principled work, people who haven't compromises. Because the thing is, if you look around you, they haven't gotten all of us. That's why we're here. Right? They haven't. They actually haven't. There's more of us. There's more of us in these spaces. If you talk to these students in the encampments, they have some sort of, they have this conviction to movement, which is always there. It's always in the students. The movements have always started on those campuses, and they build every 10 years. They build. So, if we let them go, we're going to lose them. So we have to be there as auxiliary support. as, you know, as background support, even if you're the parent that's bringing, I don't know, butter chicken to the encampments, but them knowing that you're feeding them means that you're also condoning their work. You're appreciating it. You're being that pillar of support. So to continue to support in any single way is also being part of the movement. Because those structures are there. Anytime you hear of anything related to like subduing movements, it's always going to come through. And Steve knows how I feel about these grants. I'm telling you, it really, really makes us, puts us in these shackles. And we can't be part of it. You have to have your autonomy. You have to have no strings attached. You have to be operating in your very grassroots move. This is grassroots. Everyone, when you look at their resumes, that's what it is. It's very grassroots. It's very autonomous. It's very, we control our local courts. So.
I just want to say something about fear. Fear is a natural human emotion, and it's okay to be fearful. What's not okay is being a coward. Cowardice is when we allow our fear to influence or dominate our decision making. Courage is not the absence of fear, it's the willingness and ability to confront fear. Every single one of us in this room, in spite of fears, we have courage because we're here. Us being here means that we confront our fears, whatever fears that they may be. The fact that every single person is here means that we all have courage. Now, with that courage, you have to be responsible with your courage because there's a difference between courage and stupidity. So when we're confronted with things, we have to do things in an intelligent way, even if it appears that we're moving in a space and place of weakness. One of the beautiful things about Al-Islam is that we are taught how the Muslims were commanded to operate in Mecca and when the Muslims acquired strength in Yathrib and Al-Madinah. Two different spheres, two different modalities of action. So we're taught how to operate when we're in a state of weakness, and also we're taught to operate when we're in a space of strength. So as Muslims in this modern era, we're obligated to learn how to operate in both arenas. Because for some of us, we're only going to be able to operate in a space of weakness. Some of us, we have the opportunity to operate in a space of strength. We have to know ourselves. We have to know what we're individually built for. But regardless, we still have to use that courage in an intelligent way. So, and that's an individual basis. And sometimes it hurts because it's a struggle. And all of us have different struggles. All of us, for some of us, it's a struggle to be here because we have to relive trauma of either what we've been through or what our loved ones have been through, right? All of us struggle. Some of us may struggle financially. Some of us may struggle like time-wise. We have prior engagements. But the fact that we're all committed to be here, that's what matters. And every single person in this room is a warrior because we're here. Every single person in this room has courage because in spite of whatever trauma we experienced or whatever trauma we witnessed, we're here doing work. And it doesn't matter who recognizes this work or who doesn't recognize this work. Allah recognizes the work. And the results and the victory and the reward is with Allah. So that's what our khushu', that's what our focus should be on.
Thank you. Did you want to say something? It's okay. You're among friends.
I was when you mentioned Allah, I wasn't allowed, but because oh my, I don't want to say something because my finger goes just like that.
It's okay.
Just come on.
Yes.
I just have a question. I don't need that.
Steve, no. Do you want to come up? Steve shouldn't be walking around. It hurts him.
Better stood, you should use it.
No, I just have a quick question, and that is, July 4th, 2015, when Shelley and I drove back to our property in the country, and the FBI were at the driveway, and they were on the property. And they said, you can't come on the property, we're waiting for the judge to sign a warrant. Is there anything we could have done different? Because at that point, they didn't have a signed warrant to do a property search, right? So, was there anything we could have done different?
They were getting the warrant right then?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think legally they would be able to argue that they can freeze something in that temporary moment. And basically they call it freeze. So they freeze, if you were inside the house, they could do it as well. They could just freeze people, they can't. So it's a search warrant, they're not supposed to search, they're waiting for the warrant, but they can freeze it very shortly, for a short period of time, I think, under the law.
I think it was a half an hour before.
Well, that's actually, yeah, it wasn't all day. Yeah, but half an hour. The other time they do this with people, temporary detention. So, for instance, if you saw a bank robbery, you could be going up to a bank and you could have seen the guy run out with the bank loot. Okay, it's possible. They can actually say, "Oh, you're a witness." You say, "I have to get to work. Goodbye." No, they could actually say, "You got to stay here. We're going to temporarily bring this person over. We caught him, and see if you can identify him." So there are these situations where they can temporarily detain someone. They don't need probable cause. They just need a reasonable suspicion, and sometimes it even could be if you're a witness.
So it may have been legal for them to do that. It sounds like it probably was, but even if it wasn't legal, I mean, if they're telling you can't enter your property and they have guns, maybe you can stay there and record what they're doing, but if you try to enter your property, it's not going to go well. You can't really, do things that are going to get you in worse trouble.
But I would also say you don't have to make it look as though you say you're going to consent to them being on your property, because they may not get the warrant. So I think what you could say is, I don't consent to your being on your property, and I don't want you to do anything until you get a warrant.
And if you're recording when you say that, then that's recorded
Yeah.
for posterity.
Okay. So basically,
I have some direct language we can feed them.
And then pretty soon is your...
Oh, sure. Okay. Okay, so direct language. Sometimes, we want to be nice to them because we feel like if we're not, then they're going to come after us even more. Okay, so here's how you be nice. I will obey lawful orders. I will not entertain questions without a lawyer. I do not consent to the search of my vehicle or residence. I ask to review any written warrants that pertain to me or my property. I ask that you make it clear whether I am arrested, detained, or free to go. Now, how can I help you?
Good synopsis.
And by the way, after this, everybody is going to be so tense and crazy in their head that they're going to need a yoga session with Sonala. And I urge you to go down there and get rid of all of those aching muscles that you just got in the splitting headache from this session.
Where is the yoga? Is it here?
It's going to be right here.
Oh, it starts in 2 minutes.
When does it start?
Now. 2 minutes.
Oh, it starts right now.
So, yeah. But that's
All right.
a good time to do it.
Any last thoughts from anybody?
Okay, so since it's going to be here, I'm actually going to show you move through things that you can do while you're seated in a chair. So stretches you can do while you're in a chair. Practices you can do while you're in a chair. So we call it chair yoga or chair meditation. Chair stretches. Okay, yeah, and you don't even have to change. So you can keep wearing the clothes you're wearing. And you can even keep your shoes on if you like. The only thing I ask is that you position